Welcome to another episode of The Greatest Pod, where we discuss and debate what makes something great. I'm Ed Greer, and today it's going to be a one-on-one conversation between myself and an illustrious author. I'm so glad to have him on. I've known him for years, and I knew him before he'd even published his first novel. So I'm one of the little people that was right there as he was on his ascendancy. But I really do. I really do respect this guy. He's been a friend through all of these years of doing stand-up at conventions. He's worked at various geek sites, and now he's a professional writer. So he's written 3 books. One, The Odds, a post-apocalyptic sort of Western-flavored book. The other, The Remnants. And another one I want to talk about a lot today because it fits in with the theme of this podcast is his newest novel. It's a horror novel called Strong Bones. Now, we're going to be talking about that because it is related to our subject today. But without further ado, I introduce to you Robert J. Peterson.
Ed, thanks so much for having me on. And I just want to say that the feeling is mutual on all accounts. I hold you in such high regard. It's been great to be friends with you all these years, and I'm really delighted to be on. Thank you.
Oh, dude, it's going to be a fun one today because I think a lot of our conversations here are maybe a bit esoteric. We'll knock all around all these odds and ends and all these corners of the geek universe. But I think this person we're going to talk about today has his own universe, like the Marvel universe, like DC, like anything like that, as a singular person, and it's just an odd thing to even ask, but. Is Stephen King the greatest? Because by numbers, he certainly is, and by impact, he certainly seems to be. So we're gonna knock around that conversation for the rest of this hour and see what we can find, see what we can dredge up under the rocks. So I'll ask you, Robert, what was your first exposure to the magnificence of Stephen King?
You bet. I remember it vividly. I was in 8th grade, and I wanted to get into reading him because everybody was in my class. And I read The Eyes of the Dragon. It's a lesser-known book, and it's interesting. It's one that he wrote for his kids. He wanted to write, I think famously he said, I wanted to write something that my kids could read. So he wrote just basically this kind of fairy tale. And it's been so long since I've read it, but it's a delightful read. And as happens, you mentioned his universe, so to speak, and a lot of his books do occupy this kind of common timeline. But in particular, there are the Dark Tower novels, which is this massive series of his, which I finally read recently, and The Eyes of the Dragon ties into it just a little bit, which was interesting. So yeah, that was my first exposure.
Well, it's interesting. People's first King is really informative because for me. I think it might have been the novellas and the short story collections. I gotta say, man, it's like there are people, and we're going to get into it. This isn't going to be a continuous Stephen King blowjob. There are certain things that people have decided they don't like about Stephen King, and one of them is how much more terse he is in novella form or in short story form. There's something like uber powerful about his short stories because he's like, he knows he doesn't have 700 pages to mess around. He's got like 30, 40, 22, 10. And there's just a palpable power to those stories. And I recall reading Night Shift and having it be like, oh, this is how you write. And then to be older and discover that those are written pretty quickly to go into men's magazines, I was just, how could you write that good for that purpose? It kind of blew my mind and let me know he's a real professional.
God, really well said. Like you mentioned the question of the greatest, and I certainly think he's up there. I was contemplating what would I consider King to be the greatest at, and a couple of things spring to mind. One, I think he has one of the greatest imaginations of any writer. I just think beyond any question, just like the sheer depth of stuff that he's made up is like, whether you like it or not, it's pretty awesome. And he's also, I think, one of the greatest chroniclers of America. I think he is one of the writers really keeping track of what it's like to be an American and to live in America in like the 20th and early 21st centuries. And he does that really well. He, like most of his characters, like you read his books, most of his characters, like his great leads, are like teachers and gas station attendants and
Mm-hmm.
just totally like average working stiffs. And it's great that there's somebody out there writing on such a huge popular platform who writes about folks like that.
You know what? I hadn't actually made that observation, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the most he'll go up the social ladder really is like a cop or something, because he needs the cop to be, involved in the story because of X, Y, and Z
Yep.
happening. But overall, you're right. Gas station attendants, truck drivers,
Yep.
and
Yep.
the preponderance of teachers is interesting to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think he's writing from his experience. Like him and his wife Tabitha, I think, were both English teachers, like high school
Hmm.
teachers back in the day before he hit it big with Carrie. And like you write what you know. And he also writes about writers a lot. He's it's not as prominent in his works, but he's got a few in there. And obviously, Paul Sheldon in Misery is probably the most famous example of it. But yeah, just like writing from experience.
Well, it's interesting that Stephen King, you talked about, he writes, populist heroes, and even, more regular guys than most populist writers actually write about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So, do you think that that's part of why the average Joe can get into his books so readily? Because I've seen him lambasted in certain intellectual, salon conversations. I've seen him sort of assaulted viciously, like with bats and sticks and chains,
Sure.
in those milieu. Do you think it's his? What do you think is his appeal to the common man?
I think you're definitely hitting on it with how he writes about so many regular people. He also he taps into, and I'm going to use kind of a pretentious term here. I think he taps into a lot of our collective consciousness really well,
Mm-hmm.
just in how he writes about nightmares. And I think that just as a species, like I think we've probably been having like the same kind of like dozen nightmares since like the caveman days, and they get like mixed and matched and remixed, but we keep having the same ones. And I think King is really really great at channeling that. He and that's uh, it's something that the film director David Lynch talks a lot about. He calls it catching the big fish, and that's kind of like keeping your receptors open for your subconscious mind to grab onto those really great vivid ideas. And I think King, like Lynch, incidentally, is really good at catching those big fish.
Well, yeah, and as far as big fish, there are things that are primal in his stories, but there's also
Yeah,
things, like you said, that are so imaginative that it's like, how did I even know to be scared of that? You know what I mean?
yeah.
How did he even know that that was a fear that I could have? Like I read in Night Shift, there's a story. Damn it, if I can remember what it's called, but basically, this hitman opens up a box of toys, and the toys kill him.
Yep, I remember that
And
one.
I'm just like, what the hell is this? This is
Yep.
one of those amazing, like, and then one of them was in, I just watched Cat's Eye last night. I don't know that I was doing research for this, but I always delight in the times that a major author is adapted for movies, because you can see just how strong is their DNA. It's like the seed of a father or something, how
Yeah,
much of their DNA can remain after all of this boiling down and rewriting and recontextualizing
yeah.
from all the other
Yep.
artists. And in that one, he
That's
actually wrote the screenplay. So
that's right.
he wrote the screenplay for Cat's Eye, which I found delightful, because he has a couple stories in his oeuvre that are continuous stories that I think are interesting. In Creep Show, there's a cheating, philandering wife that Ted Danson gets with, and then Leslie Nielsen sort of gives them their
Oh,
just desserts, and they just desert him back. There's
okay.
that story, which is very much like the story in Cat's Eye, where an old tennis pro is banging a mafia guy's wife, and the mafia guy's addicted to gambling and bets him, I bet you can't walk on this 5-inch ledge
Oh,
around
the
the
ledge.
building. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's called The Ledge, yeah. And
yeah.
and just things like that he's obsessed with. His take on what you do if somebody, if there's infidelity in your relationship, it's interesting. His take on a lot of things is really interesting.
Cat's Eye is great. I think the other two are the one with like a doll, and then Quitters Incorporated. Is it the one where they
Mhm.
like the gangsters making you quit smoking? Oh my god, so much fun! Quick sidebar: kudos to King for popularizing the form of the short story. I mean, obviously it's always been popular, but like he is just one of those writers that can get that form in front of a lot of people who may not always read them. But yeah, he, it's funny you mentioned his perspective on just like love and monogamy and stuff like that. If I could give another example of him using something really primal, I think effectively in a novel, it's in Pet Cemetery. It's another great one, like widely
Mhm.
regarded as one of his most terrifying books. And it's interesting. And obviously there's spoilers in this, guys, if you're listening. But the death of that baby in that book is so well placed, and it is so primal and so awful that it really unmoors the audience, and it kind of softens you up for all the nightmare stuff that's coming.
Mhm.
Because like we don't know what it's like when a cat comes back to life. My God, the prospect of losing a kid, any parent can relate to that and can think about that horror. And he's so good at tapping into that and using those devices to his own dark ends.
No, it's excellent. And one thing, and like I said, this is the fondling the cojones section of our talk about Stephen
Oh
King,
yeah,
because there are all these great things about him, and there's all these great memories a lot of us have associated with him. Because I remember vividly thinking that the Langoliers from, I think, Four Past Midnight, I think that was the novella collection that's from. And The Langoliers has since been made into a TV movie with Bronson Pinchot et
mm-hmm.
al. And there are things about it that are really quite terrible. But when you look at it as a novella, something created with words for your mind to assemble,
Right.
it's a fantastic piece of storytelling. And one of the things I remember is, going back to the word primal, that fear that not only can you not go home again, that time is being eaten at your heels,
Yeah.
as you go forward, whatever that going back to it's so funny that so much of his stuff is so nostalgic, because in Langoliers he makes it very clear in a story metaphor that if you stick around after you're not supposed to be, and you're in the empty, of the empty airport, when everybody from this time has gone on into the future. If you're in
Yeah.
that empty airport, it will be disassembled by things called the Langoliers that will eat you too, because
Yeah.
you are out of time and you don't belong. And there's something. It's you can't go home again. Damn straight in a Stephen King story.
God, that is so well put. Yeah, and I forgot about that one. That was a great read. Man.
It was really engaging, because it just makes you feel like there are these giant. I think he found a Lovecraft book, and I'm no great friend of Lovecraft for a lot of reasons, but I could see how it could fire the imagination of a young kid from Bangor, Maine, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could
Yep.
see how it could fire that imagination, because Lovecraft deals in these things. The greatest thing about him as an author, nothing else, is his ability to see that there's this giant celestial clockwork of monstrous stuff just under the surface. Monsters made of time, monsters made of space, astral
Yeah.
planes, other existences, dead elder gods. This whole other way of seeing horror, rather than, oh, your neighbor with a knife, or an
Yeah.
alien. There's stuff more alien than aliens. You know what I mean? There's stuff
Yep.
more. So I love that, and I love that aspect of King's work, that he brings some of that into the gas station. You know what I mean?
All the way. Yeah. And I'm with you on Lovecraft, 100%. There's no need to get into all of his kind of like completely disgusting sort of
Yeah,
proclivities and
yeah.
whatnot. But those ideas that he delivers in those works are big, and I have to say, that is an important contribution to literature, to think about existence in that way. The turn of phrase non-Euclidean space, I will never forget it, and just how horrifying that is. Like, that was the best this character could possibly describe what he was looking at. He's just like, the geometry isn't ours, and that's
Mhm.
and that is reverberated through, like I mentioned, David Lynch earlier, like in Twin Peaks and Stranger Things and on and on. Like, it's just like those are big ideas, but of course King as well.
Well, and in your mind, what are some of the contributions that King has made in regards to that sort of Americana horror, because I think when you look at something like Misery, that's the horror of the person next door. When you look at something like
Yeah.
It, that's the horror of, I don't know what. I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know. It is definitely Lovecraftian. So, like, what do
Yep.
you think are his major contributions to, like, okay, before King there was X, and after King there is Y?
I could go on at length because I think it's a long list. Like he is, I mean, uh, just think about just think about how vivid and common the image is of a prom queen getting doused with blood, and just what that like the message that carries. Like
Mm.
that's one that springs to mind. The clown, obviously, like that's been around for a long time, but he kind of did it the best. The A friend of mine, I remember of The Stand, he said, "Wow, King like really gave us the devil in a denim coat. This idea of the devil
Hmm.
being this kind of American sort of duded up fella, you know." And the Dark Tower books, which I don't even know if we have time to get into those, but those are really remarkable. And they carry all of, if I may, all of his imperfections as well as perfections. All of his bullshit, they're in them too. But they are just such like a wonderful deep dive into this person's mind. I have to say, and like there's moments in it of such great like sad power that I just get choked up even thinking about them. So off the top of my head, I would say those are a few. But on and on. Annie Wilkes is another great one. Like I'm your number one fan. God, I mean it's incredible. And oh, not for nothing. I don't want to like ramrod us into talking about my book, but that is clearly he had a huge influence on that. And in particular, like we call Strong Bones a horror novel, but the genre, I call it a pseudo genre. It's from there was a role playing game. This guy made up this pseudo genre for his role playing game, and he calls it Kids on Bikes. And we all know what Kids on Bikes is, right? It's the
Yep.
Goonies, it's Stand by Me, it's Stranger Things, it's It. It's The Sandlot. It's on and on. It's Little Rascals back in the day. Like that is
Hmm.
Kids on Bikes. And King, not for nothing, but he wrote two of the greatest kids on bike stories ever in Stand By Me and It. Like, my
Hmm.
God, along with everything else he did, he managed to nail two of those.
Hmm.
And for me, that was a sandbox that I wanted to play in as an author, in particular. But also, while just kind of like grappling with the death of my mom. That was I know like maybe later in the podcast we can talk about some of the process of it, but those were kind of the two kernels: Kids on Bikes and the death of my mom back in 2013 that got me
Hmm.
going on. So anyway, I'll tap the brakes there
Well, no. I mean,
and let you talk. Yeah,
we're definitely going to talk more about your book, because I think it's an interesting there's something between King and the reverential or referential writing of our times. It seems like
yeah,
we're starting to be people who, and even in King's books and works, he acknowledges novels, movies,
yeah,
things that exist in the universe in
yep,
his book. He's not trying to create some universe or some world out of whole cloth. He's adding a bit to the tapestry of our world. And I
yeah,
think that's one thing that's interesting about how the fact that he can also do like epic fantasy, like the Watchtower books. You know what I mean? Because
yeah,
I
yeah,
personally, my skill set is not this sort of world building that in conversation and in writing in anything and rapping, anything you want to say. I am not a storyteller who tries to create a whole new world. I would
right,
like to comment on ours on some level and maybe heighten certain aspects of it. But the fact
right,
that he could make, because like I am not really well versed in the Watchtower books. But one thing I loved about it was allowing the hero to be injured. Didn't he like lose some fingers and stuff?
yep,
And I'm
yeah,
just
very
like,
early on.
that was like, that kind of blew my mind as a kid, trying to get into him and failing. But it did blow my mind as a kid. I was like, wow, he's like injured. They like never injure the hero.
Yeah, yeah, and he's fucked up for the rest of the rest of the series. That injury is with him, and it's a big part of it. It's great. Yeah,
Exactly. And it's always like that, that Robert Mitchum, Steve McQueen, John Wayne shoulder
yeah,
wound, is what people would mostly get. But
yeah,
talking about some of the things that really rang, his oeuvre is so large. So the
yeah.
things that ring like a bell through all of the din of like all of the things that he's written, like you could call it a top 5 list. I'll give mine just so you can have some time to think.
Sure.
Personally, I like. I think I like Desperation. I think it's up there. Desperation and the Regulators are up there for some reason in my mind because
Yeah.
I see them as kind of trashy elder works. You know, I could see that. But the dual universes that they represent and the primal fear of getting pulled over by a cop that I think almost everybody past 1969 has on some level. You get
Yeah.
pulled over by a cop and then you don't it's something minor, you didn't do anything, and next thing you know you're in not only jail but it's sort of a holding cell for a demon who's going to bring you one by one out of the cell and sacrifice you to an elder god. Like, what the hell? It's like
Yep.
ramps that base fear again, primal. The fear of authority period has become a new primal. You know what I mean? And
Agree.
that played upon it beautifully. Another thing is, I think Night Shift as a whole, if I can say that, but obviously there's great stories in there. I like Night Surf in there. I
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah.
beautiful stuff. These stories that like they just show you the width and breadth of his imagination in that short form. I like the Langoliers as a work. I said it before. I love the Langoliers as a work. It was very palpable. So that's just a top. That's a first three of my top five. Let's say. So what say you?
Oh man, wow, great choices. So sidebar, I was mentioning pseudo genres a moment ago. So
Mm-hmm.
desperation falls into another pseudo genre that I love, and I don't know if this is a common name for it, but me and a friend we call it the Texas Detour, and that's when like a crazy cop
Yes.
waylays you and brings you up on some trumped up charge, and then you're stuck in this town. And that's actually one of my earlier novels, which will probably never see the light of day, but I love it, and it's totally my kind of like Southern fried riff on the Texas Detour.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just want to give a shout out to that. But as far as like my favorites, I would say that Misery is perennially a favorite for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because it's great, but because for me there are books about writing. Right? There's Strunk and
Mm-hmm.
White. There's On Writing Well by William Zinsser. Stephen King wrote one called On Writing, and those
Mm-hmm.
books are good, and you should check them out and consider them and try to absorb like parts that you like. But for me, Misery, he's not just writing about writing; he's writing about the sheer wizardry of it, the magic of it, the fun of it. Like my favorite moment in Misery is when this is after he's been captured, obviously, and he kind of tries this bullshit first take on bringing Misery back from the dead. And, and he's just like, that's not how she cockadoodie died. And he's like, oh, I guess I got to try something else. And then, even though he's being held captive and he's terrified, he comes up with a really cool idea and there's no stopping him. And he's so excited about it. He wakes up and he's like, you got to get me my typewriter. And I was like, wow, that is what it's like. It is this demon in your head. You can't shut up. And then after that, God, I mean, I would say it. I mean, it's interesting. Like it, like I mentioned, it being like a kids on bikes novel, but like that, he captures the magic and the horror of being a kid um, better than just about anybody. And one thing in particular that I really related to as a kid, and frankly still as an adult, is that growing up, I'm not trying to be too harsh or too mean, but I did not have a lot of good grown-ups in my life growing up. I did not have good role models. I certainly did not have any good male role models. And I know that's kind of charged language to use, but it's the truth. And that really that was tough for me growing up. And King really gets that. Like remember that scene in It, like those scenes in It where the kids are in trouble and they're like calling to a grown up, hey, and the grown up just like goes inside. And it's like, yeah, they don't give a fuck. You're on your own. And like honest, and that's something that King he captured so beautifully and so well, I think. God, and then after that, boy, I will tell you something. Of the Dark Tower books, the sixth one, for some reason, is the one that really just like stuck to my ribs. It's called Song of Susanna, and it's mostly about this one character, Susanna. It includes this scene that would be just a grotesque spoiler if I were to describe it. But it's one of those scenes. It's the scene I was referring to earlier. That is so simple and just so like right on the money, and just so sweet and beautiful. And just the fact that he got to this scene after this incredible output of work, it just, God, I just wanted to like hug the guy. I was like, man, like, well done, like getting to this point. So I'll stop at 3 there, but man, it's a long list.
Oh, it's a super long list. What I would
Yeah,
also add, you know what? I think I might be like I don't know, maybe I come from the land of the lesser. You know, like I love people's so-called lesser works. I'll always find
same.
something in people's lesser works, and maybe it's the contrarian in me, stuff like that. But one of his big, like this book, straight up could have been 120 pages, but it's not because it's Stephen King, and that is Gerald's Game. I
Oh
read
yeah,
Gerald's Game on like a trip, and
yeah,
I just ripped through it, and and it definitely had all of these touchstones for this woman, these emotional touchstones that they revealed more and more about her past and her
yeah,
relationship with abusive men and all this kind of jazz, and how it all ended up with her being with yet another one, kind of, and being trapped in a cabin locked to a bed for like days, and what would happen to you, and what places your mind would go.
yeah.
And then there's a big, I won't spoil it, but like there's a big spoiler at the end of the book where it's like maybe she wasn't imagining all of the horrific things she felt like was happening in the house and the
Yep,
horrific danger that she was in the whole time. Maybe she wasn't imagining that. In fact, she was
yeah,
not. Oh, it's chilling.
yeah,
It's chilling me right now. I'm getting chills right now
yep.
because of how uh like beautifully that was constructed. You know what I mean? It's just
Agree.
real deal big boy novel writing. You know what I mean?
I am with you, and for my complaints about King or anybody's complaints about them, like that is some serious stuff. And I'm so glad you brought up Gerald's Game because I forget about that one too. But like just the fact that he grappled, I think, so gamely with like the psychology of a woman, which like I think it's tough to write out of your lane about fucking anybody, man, about a woman,
Mm,
about like there's you gave me a read for a character in Strong Bones who's black, and that was a big
hmm
lift for me and stuff like that. And I just think that is one of the jobs of a novelist is to try to reach into the psychologies of other people
hmm
and to feel empathy for them. One of my colleagues, the author Mark Falcon, he's one of my authors at CCB. He calls novels empathy engines. I'm like, by God, that's right. Like that's what
Ah,
they're there for, you know? Yeah,
I mean, that's a great turn of phrase, man.
yeah,
I am jealous of that.
yeah, yeah. He's
That's a
great.
great turn of phrase.
He's a hell of a guy. Yeah,
Even like Misery, a thing like Misery, the thing that he's doing in setting up this world where this guy is famous, and setting up that he's just sort of on this trip that he always makes to do this thing he always does. It's like it just shows you what his normal life is, which is extraordinary and full
yep,
of art and life and all this jazz. And then boom, you're under somebody's thumb and you're no
yeah,
one. And and because you are so famous, that's why you are no one to this person. That's why
yeah,
they have you under their thumb in this manner. That's why you have so little power in this situation. It's because you are a big man out there, but in the woods with this lady with this axe, you are no one. It's just great.
That's really beautifully put. And I think my wife may have said this, but she said, like, because we were talking about like celebrities and stuff like that. And she said, yeah, like the nature of fandom is that you have this relationship with somebody that they don't have with you. And
Mm.
that is, and that's something where yeah, I mean, it could be kind of like, like insufferable when rich, famous people complain about, oh, I'm rich and I can't go anywhere. But like at the same time, like, God, I get it. Like
hmm
you give up this privacy, you give up this part of yourself, and like a lot of fans like feel entitled to it. And that's something obviously among all these other things that King depicts so powerfully in Misery.
And I also wanted to talk about another of his works that I like in both movie and book form, like a
Yeah.
lot, is Christine. I like Christine in the book form and the movie form almost equally, and I don't know how that even could happen. I also like sometimes they come back, or they sometimes come back, whichever
Mhm.
whatever. About like a teacher who had some bad kids that he like dispatched a long time ago, and now their ghosts come back to menace
Yep.
him.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just that's some chilling jazz because it's about like your sins and even your wants to sin from the past never
Yeah.
die and can come back. You
Nope.
know what I mean? One last short story I wanted to talk about. Probably not the last, but I think it's
Yes, please.
called Strawberry Summer from
I
Night
know that one.
Shift, where basically there's this guy. Long story boring. He basically goes through a summer on a college campus where people are being attacked and killed, and the origin of who's killing them could be as close as inside his house. And it's just
Ooh.
it's just as it's a nice, um even told in that O. Henry fashion I just did. It's very it's very arresting when you're finding out that, like, you might be close to a
Yeah.
murderer. You might there's a screenplay knocking around about, like, somebody in the walls, and this kid is like hearing someone in the walls, and his parents are telling him there's no one in the walls, and when that person in the walls gets out, that's your ass. And there,
Yeah.
there's just shit like that. It's just it's giving me creepies right now, and it's broad daylight. And I think that's the power of King as well, is like to
Yeah.
be able to get in your mind and scare you. But also, I got to say, you can't scare anybody if there isn't a verisimilitude
No.
to the world that you're talking
Yep.
about. None of this crap is scary if you don't believe that the guy went down to the Citgo, he got him a brewski, he comes back, and now he's covered in this gray fungus, and the whole town is covered in gray fungus, and it's going to get
Yep.
on you, and we're all becoming a giant host organism. None of it works unless you really believe that he needed to go get that beer down at the Citgo.
Absolutely. That brings to mind one of my all-time favorite quotes by a writer about a writer, and it's by the author John Irving, who I'm sure you've heard of, The World According to
Mm-hmm.
Gar, Prepare for El Mini. And he's also from New England, and he and King are friends. And in one of his nonfiction books, I don't know how well you know John Irving, but wrestling always comes up in his books, amateur kind of high school wrestling. It's one of his things. And he was officiating a wrestling match, kind of like way out in the sticks in Maine somewhere. And he wrote this line. He was like, he said, "My good friend Stephen King writes about a great many unusual figures in the backwoods of New England. I assure you, he's not making any of them up." I just love that. And like you, and like getting back to King as this chronicler of America, he writes about average working stiffs and teachers and gas station attendants. And you mentioned, or I don't know if you did, but we were talking about Pet Cemetery and just about crafting this really relatable world. Just think about how crunchy and real that neighborhood is in Pet Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Like the kooky old New England guy next door neighbor. That Pet Cemetery, which like we didn't exactly have something like that as a kid, but we had like we buried our pets like out in the front yard. Like we all, again, it's these collective. It is these images that emanate from our collective consciousness that I think King is just so great at tapping into.
Yeah, I think this is where we can start talking about how he does have a certain way of seeing the world that
Yeah.
comes up over and over again. And when people have talked about, his magical Negro propensity, you know what I mean? It's
Yep.
a way for a guy from Maine to work a black. It's magic that this black person's even here. So why don't
Yep.
I make the magic? You know what I
Can
mean?
you believe it? Yeah. No. Totally.
You know what I mean? It's just, and
Yep.
I think people balk at that and don't like it, and it's something that I've bumped up against in his work as well. But I think I might prefer that to the utter exclusion of people of color at all or whatever. I just think it's one of those things where I was watching a zombie movie the other day. I don't even Scout's Guide to Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse. It's a
Okay.
little ditty. It's not some major work, but I like it. It was enjoyable. And they have this. It's the most white town you've ever seen in your life. And then a black soldier shows up, and he's magnificent. And he shoots some zombies, and he saves the kids. And then he meets an end because the kids have to be the hero of their own tale. So I'm not, not balking at his death in that way at all. But it's just like he couldn't be just a regular guy down the street. He had to be this magnificent soldier out of the woods. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's this propensity to, when you're working in, the minority, is either, hey, put him as the boss yelling at Nick Nolte. That'll
Yep.
be inclusion. You know what I mean?
Oh
It's
yeah.
just it's
Yep.
this weird little stuff. So you mentioned that I gave you a read on your book Strong Bones. I'd like
Yep.
to talk about that now, because
Yeah. Please.
I think you did a great job of, like, looking at my notes, and probably many other smarter people than me's notes, and assembling that book, because what I read was fantastic. And
Thank
from
you.
the Kirkus review that you got, it's even better than when I read it. So, what was your process, your personal process for your own personal? You became your own personal Stephen King. It's very rare that you get to talk to somebody who's attempted the kids on bikes slash, I think the review compared you a little bit to Ernest Cline and your love for
Yep.
reference and stuff. So like
Yep.
you built your own, like, after Stranger Things, after it, after this, you built a world like in that milieu with the Spielbergian meets the Stephen Kingian. What was
Right.
that process like? And just walk us through being an author.
Wow. Thank you so much for asking. I don't get to talk about this stuff much, and I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just been thinking about how I would sort of talk about this, and if it's okay, I'd kind of like to talk about the book generally, and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
kind of drill down into that character, Justin Johnson,
Yes.
and our experience and stuff like that. So generally, I mentioned the death of my mom. So let me just give you the absolute beginning kernel. So she died back in 2013, and it was very unexpected, and it sucked. And I remember my sister and we actually contemplated spreading her ashes in Disney World, like in the Haunted Mansion, the ride in Disney World.
Yeah.
And like, I know that sounds dumb, but like, believe me when I say that, like, I had a rocky upbringing, and we would take these trips to Disney World, and it was kind of like one of the only times when like mom seemed to be having fun and we were having a good time. And so then I went down this rabbit hole of how to do that. And there is this whole subculture of people who do it. It is very much frowned upon by the Disney brass. They have special vacuum cleaners they bring into the ride to vacuum up cremains.
Oh God.
Fascinating. Yeah. So that kind of got me started. And then the other thing that I wanted to write about, and I know this is kind of heavy stuff, so just bear with me, but I kind of grew up in an abusive home. I just want to be mindful. Plenty of people had it worse. I'm not I'm nobody special, but it was tough. And I wanted to write about that in like a real way. So then that kind of brought that in, and dovetailed with this tough upbringing that I had. Was the fact that like I loved my mom, and we said I love you all the time, but I'm not sure if we liked each other. Like I had a really prickly and contentious relationship with her. So then I found myself wanting to write this book about these kids who want to spread their mom's ashes in this other kind of made up theme park. I very loosely based it on Dollywood back in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Dolly Parton's theme park.
Yes.
I just want to be clear that like there's no one character in any one of my books that maps directly onto any one person. I mean, like I'm drawn from like a lot of different people. But there are two characters that's like roughly my proxy, and then they marry into an abusive family. Basically, their mom is single. She marries this guy, and his siblings are kind of really mean, right? And he's awful. But then it was just these four characters, and then I introduced two new characters who were like friends of these kids. A big one of the driving images, if not the kind of main motif, the main image in Strong Bones is this, and this is a dream that I have had my entire life, and I think it's another collective consciousness thing, and that is discovering a new room in your house. Have you ever had that? Have you ever had that dream? You know what I'm talking about? And so not only that, but there was a feeling, not about a room in my house, although I think this may have happened, but where a family member told me about something that had happened in my family's past, and it was kind of a nasty thing. And they thought I already knew about it, and I didn't. And there was something so surreal about that feeling, and it reminded me of those dreams that I had, where I found a new room in my house, and in these dreams, my family was like, "Yeah, that it's always been there. What do you mean you don't know it was there?" So that's the first thing that happens in Strong Bones, is that this kid, he finds a new room in his house, and he goes to tell his mom, and she's like, "What are you talking about? It's always been there." And that kind of kicks everything off. So I need to pitch this series of YouTube videos, and bear with me. I know this is long-winded, but I need to tell you about these. So I love secret rooms and going behind the scenes and theme park rides and shit like that. And there was this ride at Epcot Center in Disney World. Epcot Center is the big like geodesic dome sphere and all that. There was this ride. It's since been torn down, but it was called Horizons. And it enjoys this loyal following among Disney fans. It was this very cheerful look at the future. It was super fun. And these two like North Florida good old boys basically figured out back in the day how to hack the ride. They figured out the gaps in the ride security, and they figured out they could jump out of the ride vehicles and sneak into the ride's systems and its back rooms and take pictures with the animatronics and shit like that. And they did it for years. They would spend like all day inside this ride, and they videotaped everything. And it's just this beautiful YouTube channel of their adventures behind the scenes in this ride. And incidentally, this documentary, it's these two guys, and I'm not making this up. It ends, one of them dies, and he spreads his ashes in Disney World. And it was just so, I'm getting choked up even thinking about it. Yeah, and it just speaks to like these childhood experiences. So that's some of the stuff that went into the cauldron. Now the Ernest Cline kind of Ready Player One stuff. That's another sandbox that I wanted to play in, because I think that writing about the 80s and 90s, it is impossible not to talk conversantly about how powerful pop culture was at the time, and what it looked like, and what it felt like, and what malls smelled like, and shit like that. And that was another big part of it. And I wanted to draw on. It's funny, like nostalgia. You can carbon date stuff to the minute and second. Like Ernest Cline, like the nostalgia that Ernest Cline traffics in Ready Player One, it's very good. But I'm like, I can tell you what year that person was born. Same thing for me, where there was like a certain era of video games that I wanted to write about. There was a certain two Saturday morning cartoons that contributed heavily to this. Were one, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. I don't know if you remember that one, where they go into a theme park ride and it transports them to another world. And then there was another one, and this is a deep cut. It was called Kid Video. And this is like, man, I'm betraying my age. It was like back in the day, and it was about these kids. They were in a rock band, and they got transported to this magical world where they turned into cartoons. And let me just tell you something. That was one of my first goals as a kid, was to get turned into a cartoon. I was like, I'm going to figure out a way to do it. And in Strong Bones, under certain circumstances, the kind of magic these kids use, there are certain ways that they will get turned into a cartoon, and that's another sandbox I wanted to play in. So those there's a Lovecraftian influence. The figure on the cover of the book, this man, I don't know if you've seen the cover of the book. I think I showed it.
The plaid face man.
The plaid face man. That was the first recurring nightmare I had as a kid. And I think that is another very powerful image, I think, from our collective consciousness. I think Slender Man is an example of that. I think the Mothman is an example of that. Just these mysterious figures who menace you for some reason. And I dreamt about this guy all the time. And so anyway, I got to go back and sort of write about him. So anyway, I'll tap the brakes there. Do you have any questions? Anything you want me to drill down on before we talk about Justin, or is that, or you're like, that's enough?
Dude, no. Look, I think it's very kind of you to get a little self-conscious about talking so passionately about your work and stuff. It's very kind, because a lot of people are just like, my work is so awesome. You of course would want to hear all this stuff. But I think what you just gave us was like the assembly of a novel. And that's why I let you roll, because like that's important to try to, that's what these conversations are about. Is like, okay, how does one assemble a novel? Well, you take a little Kid Video, you take a little Dungeons and Dragons, you take a little of sprinkling ashes and these great pop culture sites. It's about you as a person, your life contributing to the life of something that will outlive you, like an amusement park, like a pop culture brand. Like I've been thinking about this a lot lately. We had a conversation on the Patreon, which you could join at Patreon.com/The Greatest Pod, and you can get $5 extra pods like the one I'm about to talk about, or you can get those as well as art sent to your door for $7. So $5 tier pods, $7 tier pods, and art. We talked on the Greatest Pod Patreon about characters we don't love anymore. And one of the things that got me was like, I started resenting the fact that Batman would outlast me. It hit me hard that Batman, my grandkids will be dead, and Batman will be on somebody's screen or in somebody's book. You know what I mean? And it affected me in this really primal way that word keeps coming up. So like somebody wanting to sprinkle their ashes inside of this structure, which brought them so much joy in life, which will be there long after they're gone, and there's going to be a part of their essence in that thing. That is, there's all these sorts of ways we try to defeat Father Time. And one of them is by doing great works that make you immortal. And the other is being part of immortal things on some
Yeah.
level, you know? So I mean, and you talked about the plaid man in the treatment, scriptment, whatever you want to call it, that you have an intriguing style. If I can reveal what you did, what you
Sure,
showed
please.
me, basically what you did when you were working the book out was, instead of sending people a giant stack of like novel pages in galley form to be like, hey person, read 400 pages of my thoughts, you're like, okay, that might not be the best way for me to work out the story. That might not be the best way for me to get notes on the story, because the story is the bones. You don't.
Yeah.
I don't think letting people dictate to you what skin and muscles and fibers of clothes you're going to put on your book is frankly useful. But people can comment on the bones, you know, strong bones. They can comment on the bones of it and give you something to let you know whether or not you're attaching these characters and their travails to people in a serious way that they can follow the emotional roller coaster.
Right.
If you're not able to attach people to your story in the bone stage, you could put all the flesh on it all you want. It won't necessarily be a being. So
Yeah.
that being the case, when I read how you explained the story to me, you wrote like I'd call a scriptment or a screen novel, which is you kind of using screenplay slugs to denote like exterior this, interior that,
Yep.
and then more or less writing in a sort of pigeon prose that was between screenwriting and prose to get across what was happening in the scene
Right.
with more detail than perhaps a script, but less than a novel. And it was just perfect and beautiful. It was a good way for me to see the overall bones of your story.
Man, thanks. Maybe we can talk about Justin some now. But yeah, that was I hadn't tried that before. I'm definitely an outliner. I'm a big believer in it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I kind of like really dove into Strong Bones like hardcore a few years ago, it had been a number of years since I had finished a new novel. I had polished books, I had rewritten some and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. But it had been since 2012 since I'd finished like a brand new book. And I was like, man, I need to make this easy on myself. I need an easy way to like get into this story. And that I call it the weird screenplay version in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really easy way because like I didn't have to worry about like, oh, perspective and any of that stuff. I could just kind of like just power ahead through it. And I'm really glad I did, because I basically got to write the entire novel. And I don't want to say complete, but the whole damn story was out there, including like mistakes that I made. And oh God, in my books, there's always at least one character whose voice I don't discover until I get to the end of the damn book. I swear to God, I don't know what's wrong
Mm-hmm.
with it, but there's always like one character who's just kind of like beep boop, and then at the end they're like, he's alive. So it was great to like get that out of the way before I even like put
Mm-hmm.
pen to page for the first time. But yeah, so Justin, that was it was in that stage, that screenplay stage, when I sent you some pages based on him. And this is a really interesting topic, I think, in just writing in general. It's also a topic of some contention, I think, in the publishing industry lately. I don't know how plugged in you are to that kind of part of the world. And that is people writing outside their lane, writing about a character who is of a different ethnicity or gender expression or like amount of ability or something like that. And there's a lot of I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I think there's a lot of toxic stuff, but it is something that I will leave to the reader to decide how well I pulled this character off.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a really heavy lift for me because like I was just like the prospect of writing like an explicitly all white cast, Ed, fucking made my skin crawl. I mean, Jesus, like, and I am no great shakes. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but I was just like, I really want to give this character a shot. And if you don't mind me sharing the other beta readers that I had,
Uh-huh.
it was you, and then two authors who I'm buddies with, a woman named Tiffany White who lives down in Texas, the mystery author Gar Anthony Haywood, and I hope Gar doesn't mind me saying this, but I consider him a mentor. Like he and I have known each other for like 15 years. We used to write in the same coffee shop. Like we got to be friends. Like he's just such an awesome dude, and I gave him a lot of the same pages that I gave you for Justin, like pretty early on. And then our buddy Stefano Terry, who I think you know, the artist and all that, awesome guy, and he gave me a read on kind of a different angle of him. But it was so I think I told you that the very genesis of the Justin character was from a Kids on Bike movie from the 80s called Explorers. And I don't know if you know that one. That's one where kids are having dreams and they dream of the plans for a spaceship.
Yep.
And the great character actor Dick Miller, who if you don't know his face, look him up. You'll know his face. He's been in everything.
Yep.
Just this delightful old character actor, and he had this small part in the movie where, and I'm getting choked up even thinking about it, where he was just like, God, I'm having these dreams again, and I don't think they're dreams. So you found out that like he is having these magical dreams too, and that was kind of the genesis for the Justin character. And so, podcast listeners, the big note that Ed gave me, and give me a kick if I mischaracterize like how you put it to me, was that at this stage of the book, Justin was kind of a smaller character because he was closer to like the Dick Miller character from Explorers, right? He was closer to like that kind of involvement in the story. And I remember you said, you were like, God, if he's kind of only there to sort of like be in a couple scenes and like help these kids out, like he's kind of a magical Negro. And you should think about that. I forget exactly what you said. And boy, I tell you, man, it really stopped me in my tracks. And I think I even told you over email, I thought about changing him. I thought about changing his ethnicity and making him another character. But I was like, man, I'm going to give this a go. Like, I just like, by God, if I fuck up, I fuck up. But like, I want to give this guy like a real shot. And what was what wound up being so gratifying for me, at least, and again, I don't know how readers are going to react to this guy, was that I mentioned earlier that I had this prickly and contentious relationship with my mom. But I'll tell you something, man, it wasn't all bad. And the stuff about my mom that I remembered and I really liked and I really loved and the affectionate part of her kind of all got packed into Justin and his mom. If that makes sense. And in concert with that, pivoting back to that prickly relationship with my mom, I found myself writing this story about these kids who kind of had this tough relationship with their mom, but they wanted to scatter ashes in this theme park ride, an act of love. And I found myself not being able to justify why they would do that. So then I wound up just like spreading the magic among everybody. Like everybody had a stake in this ritual. Scattering the ashes was only one thing they had to do in this larger ritual. We got to do all this other shit. And another thing that I really took care of, because you mentioned, I forget what story it was, that kids movie, but the soldier coming into town and he was like, he's awesome and he kills zombies, was that I really took care that everybody got to contribute to the magic, and frankly, that everybody fucked up. Everybody in that book fucks up at some point, in some way. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. And in Justin's case, if you recall his involvement with the book's villain, there's this serial killer in the book, Lenny Skelton, who preys on kids. And Justin had this near miss with him back in the past, and he almost caught him, but he just like slipped away from him. And it turns out magically, as happens. And that just like haunts Justin for the rest of his life, you know? And like the whole book is about him just like grappling with this and thinking like, God, did I do the right thing? And I like getting to write about like kind of that part of my mom. Like one thing, if you don't mind me kind of getting sort of deep here, and thank you for like, for listening. But one thing that I sort of packed into Justin was something about myself that it's a very grim kind of gallows humor, but I call early May Bob's Depression Christmas. And the reason why is because my mom, I forget what even day she died in the year. It was in September sometime, but her birthday is May 9th. And May 9th, as happens, it almost always is on or around Mother's Day. And like, God, Ed, I don't begrudge anybody having a mother that they love or who is still around. But like, especially like on Facebook, I was just like, God, I would start getting gloomy like at the end of April. I'd be like, oh, here it comes. And that was something that like I packed into Justin, was this dialogue with grief. I wound up writing a lot about and thinking and reading a lot about grief because like I had lost so many people over the years. And this is a deep cut. And like, I don't know if any of my friends from high school are going to hear this, but when I was in 9th grade, one of my classmates who I kind of knew, but he and his brother, who was a senior, who was a 12th grader, they both went out to see a rock concert and they died. They died in a car crash. They were both gone that night. And like, I barely knew this kid, but I didn't even think about it until recently. And then through sort of like kind of like random kind of means, I landed on a blog that was written by their mom, this mom who had lost these two kids back in the day in one night.
Whoa.
Yeah. And if like, if for some reason this podcast happens to come across her transom, I just want to say that I wish I could give you a hug. And your writing is just beautiful and lyrical and gorgeous, and you really stopped me in my tracks again. And one thing that she said in this blog, Ed, was that she said time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. I feel as bad right now in 2019 as I did that night. Nothing has gotten better. And that really, like, I'm finding that like that is really true for a lot of people. And that was something else that like I packed into Justin, who had also like lost his mom, and I got to like think about that, and just him like thinking about like, God, like the last time I saw her, like what if somebody like came up to me and was like, hey, that's the last time you're going to see her alive. What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. And I got to like write about all of those things with him, and by radically expanding the size of his role. And again, going from like kind of timidly saying like, oh, this guy's kind of in the book, to like him being like one of the leads. Like there's kind of 8 leads. There's like all these characters, and he wound up being one of them. And like Gar gave me a certain read. Like Tiffany gave me like a lot of really tough notes that were super interesting. Stefano, for his part, I kind of went to him for a lot of pop culture stuff, just because, like I mentioned, the kids turning into cartoons, and I was just like, what cartoon is he going to turn into? And I was just like, because I don't really have that. I was just like I saw like Lando or like Roadblock from G.I. Joe, and I was like, that's not enough. Like what? And Stefano just gave me like the best damn notes, man. Like he really like went above and beyond to like walk me through this stuff, and I'm just super grateful. And again, I do not know how well I pulled this guy off, but by God, I did my level best, and I'm just really grateful to all of y'all for your time and your energy and all that. So anyway, I know that was long. Thanks for
It takes a village to write a book, and that's one thing that I kind of want to impress as we round out here is the community that Stephen King was around. It's just imagine. So you just elucidated what kind of community it took to make your book. Then you look at like Tabitha and his kids and their friends and stuff. There's something more than just his genius at work there. There's this community, and Tabitha famously fished the first 3 pages of the short story version of Carrie out of the toilet, out of the trash. You know what I mean? And I think of the times that sometimes my girlfriend will come and say, that's good. And I'll be like, that's ass, dude. I'm about to throw that away. And, and it's like, no, like I get it because of XYZ, and she's very well versed in all sorts of intellectual pursuits. That's why I love her. But like, she also has the eye of the human being out there who's going to consume art, not the person who's slavishly, obsessed with it. So it is interesting to like the community that makes a Stephen King, or Robert J. Peterson. You know what I mean? Like there, and I'm thinking about, the screenplays that I'm writing. I think I have my own Texas Detour that I'm writing, and and it's just one of these things where I'd love to be able to count on you to like look at it in galley form or whatnot. And I'm also like, you've inspired me to like maybe explore it as like a book, because I've been bumping up against things. I'd like to talk briefly now about the difference between screenplay writing and novels. And because one of our last episodes, maybe the one that comes out right before this, was we had a filmmaker on, RB3, Robert Butler III, and he was talking about like movies being the greatest escape, and how like, and I think I said sometime during the recording that like they're the greatest escape, even better than novels and even better than comic books and all this jazz, because you just sit down and all your other senses are turned off, but your eye holes and your ear holes are open, and it just flows over you. And then though I was really it's odd jumping around why I think all these thoughts, but like the RZA, I was watching an interview with the RZA, and he said his uncle from North Carolina saved maybe his life by telling him that you have to read, like you have to, because there's something integral in the fact that if you read Jack of the Beanstalk Jack could be little Bobby Diggs, the RZA. Jack could be little Bobby Peterson. Jack could be Ed Greer. With your mind, you as an author, or as part of the authorship of the thing, get to cast all the roles and design all the sets and do all this stuff to put it in a movie parlance. You create it
Yeah.
along with the author, and there's something powerful about the imagination that it takes to really, like, I think people who find reading books boring don't, for some reason, and not to disrespect them in any way, but they don't have the machinery in their head to build along with the author. They're just
Yeah.
there with some limp words on a page. And novels aren't words on a page. They're like IKEA instructions on how to assemble something in your head.
Yeah. That is so beautifully put. And yeah, you mentioned over text, just maybe talking about like why novels are the greatest, and like it is certainly my favorite art form. It is my chosen art form. I don't really think I'm good at anything, but I'm kind of a journeyman when it comes to writing books. And it is it's interesting. In contrast with screenplay writing and like real screenplay writing, not the weird thing I sent you, but like if you're actually writing a screenplay, I think that screenwriting has way more in common with poetry than a lot of people know. Just because you only have so many pages, unless you're like Scorsese or Tarantino or somebody, you only have like 90 or 100 pages, and there's this economy of space, and there's no stopping it. And you really have to like deliver so many gems and set so many scenes in just these really beautiful poetic ways. One example that always springs to mind, the screenwriter Shane Black. He is famous for his very readable, fun screenplays. And there's a line in The Last Boy Scout, the screenplay, where he is describing this hapless detective's shitty apartment. And I think he says, imagine if everything flew out of a passing airliner and landed in this guy's living room. That's what this person's house looks like. Poetry. That is just so poetic. He doesn't say like, oh, there's papers strewn, and beer bottles. That's how he puts it. Whereas by contrast, there is something. It's funny. One of the greatest examples of novelistic storytelling that I always go back to is a novel. It's the show The Wire. That to me is one of the easiest ways, along with just reading a book, but like to get an idea of just kind of like what a novel does that other forms don't or can't. And there is a depth of expression, a richness of character that I think is only possible in that format. And I think The Wire really beautifully captures that. There's just something Dickensian about it. Anyway, but I'll stop there. But yeah, I think novels are the greatest.
Yeah, well, and another thing about novels, I think, is you touched on it there, but I'd like to make it explicit. The amount of plot lines and main characters. When you said you had 8 leads in Strong Bones, when they eventually make it into a movie, the first thing the showrunner or the movie guy is going to say is, you cannot have 8 main characters. You cannot. It is impossible. Yeah. And in a book, it certainly is possible. It's encouraged almost because of the fact that you get such a depth in each scene. Let's say you get like 3 or 4 tracks going of different scenes featuring different characters, numbering about 9. The depth that you can go into a 3-minute scene between 3 of the characters in a novel. Yeah. It's bigger than that, and it's showing more. And then when one of the characters starts letting their mind drift back to the time when they were yada yada yada, which is going to impress upon the plot later. When they have this odd remembrance, it's more like how we actually think than film. If that makes any sense, we don't think in this cohesive building towards we don't think of this building towards rising action, yada, yada, yada. Right. That's not how life flows. It flows backwards and forwards and sideways. There's lateral moves aplenty. But overall, the enriched soil that is tilled through that method makes these giant things grow. And I think that's something that novels do better. And also just plainly, the interior life of characters. You touched on that as well. The interior life of characters. There's so many characters but I think that's a thing about adapting a movie though from a novel is finding out which characters and how much interior life is necessary for you to get the story. That's
Yep.
probably the most intriguing part about adapting anything. Have you ever thought about doing that?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I've definitely the odds got adapted into an audio drama, which is really a really interesting process.
Nice.
And yeah, it was super fun. Like the production didn't wind up happening, but I think it's a beautiful piece of writing. And I got to work in like a writer's room, so that was interesting. And yeah, I have certainly thought about what adaptations of some of my books would look like. And just like adapting novels in general. Like I forget who said this, but somebody said that like the best film adaptations of books are in a dialogue with the source material. They are not just like slavishly putting the stuff on screen, but they
Mm-hmm.
are really like they are finding the best way to get the author's intent and tone across. That for me is more important than anything. And one of the greatest adaptations, I think, is Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, where
Mm.
he and his writers, I think Fran Walsh and et al., they mixed and matched that text so beautifully, where they would mine the narrative text, like not the dialogue, but like the narrative text for these gems, and then they would reassign them as dialogue to different characters.
Mm.
And they gently corrected a lot of the original text's flaws. They had the good sense to recognize that Sam is the lead character and the hero of that story, and like those are all like really beautiful things that adaptation can do to underline and highlight things. Oh, could I? I'm kind of running like off here, but could I
Mm.
mention one more great character from a novel who informed Justin Johnson in Strongbones?
Oh yeah.
And it was one of his. It's funny. This is so random, but like there is a character type who I go back to a lot in my writing, and I call it a knight in exile who is looking for a cause. A great example of such a character is in Game of Thrones, Sir Jorah Mormont. I don't know if you remember him. He is literally a knight. He is in exile and he is looking for a cause, and it's Daenerys. But this character for me, he or she comes up a lot, and they are typically in exile, and there is a stillness and kindness about them. They have typically they've had some kind of trauma in their past, and they're just trying to make things right in the world. Justin wound up being that character in Strongbones, and along with like the guy from Explorers and all that. Two other characters that informed him strongly was one from The Wire, who also, God, if I can cast it, I'd love to get him. But it'd be Chad Coleman's character from The Wire. Do you remember Cuddy? He had the
Uh-huh.
boxing gym. Remember, like
Mm-hmm.
he just got out of prison and he almost like
Mm-hmm.
went back into the game, but he was like, God, I can't stay up this late. And he was like, and then he like went straight and opened that boxing gym, and he just had this stillness about him. And then another character, and you mentioned like what novels can do. I don't know if you ever read the Western Lonesome Dove. My God, what a read. And that book, there is like a million lead characters. And just when you think you've met all the lead characters, Ed, it goes to part two of the book, and there's a whole other new lead character. There's this one, like one of the main lead characters is on the run from the police, from the sheriff in this one town. And you meet this sheriff, and his name is July Johnson. So JJ. That was another kind of thing that informed Justin. And this character he is hands down, he is the knight in exile, and he just has this stillness and this sweetness and this quietness about him. And like a lot of these characters that I was talking about, he has really fucked up a lot in his past. But like when the chips are down, like he is just so brave and forthright and just gentle and kind. Anyway, just all these things that I really value. So thanks for letting me hold forth at length. I appreciate it.
Well, no, and as we round out here, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Is yeah, some of the power of novels, and I really don't know. It might have a dual, a hybrid title for this. Maybe I put
Right.
Stephen King in there for the clicks, and also an enhanced discussion of novels as a nice reverse amuse bouche dessert, whatever. Uh,
Right. Into it.
because I think that it's important in any sort of understanding of Stephen King or populist fiction, period, is understanding some of these mechanisms on how it works and why to this day. I mean, I know everybody loves comic books as these sort of proof of concept things, but I don't think you can do better than a novel because in the end, basically a graphic novel is like a tin of cookies basically, and you get 5 6, in my case 8 9 damn cookies, and you're sated and you're satiated, and there can
Yep.
still be a bunch of cookies left. But a novel, it's like it's a whole big ass 3-decker cake. Like a stripper could be inside this cake, and you can take the thinnest layer of the frosting on the top layer and make a whole movie out of it. That
Yeah,
to me is the difference between adapting from a graphic novel. And of course,
yeah.
me being fat, I would have to go to food to make that metaphor. But I think it's
Come
like
on.
there's more stuff, and there's more there's more story DNA in the fingernail of a novel than
Yeah.
half the body of like a comic book sometimes. And I
Yep.
think it's a lot of times comic books will need to be expanded, whereas novels are most likely they need to be something contracted, something even further
Yep.
distilled.
Yeah.
That's how potent they are. And so I couldn't think of a better person to come on here and talk about novels and the great Stephen King. Probably, I gotta say, probably the greatest popular novel since Dickens or some damn body, you
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that the title of this goes well. But anyway, as we dismount here, tell people how they can contact you on social media and stalk you and stalk your Cold Blood Press and stuff, and
You
also
bet.
though how to buy Strong Bones if they're interested.
You bet. It's going to sound weird. I don't really have any social media. I got rid of all of it. But if you do want to reach out to me, the California Cold Blood still has a Twitter account. It's CALIF Cold Blood, Calif Cold Blood. My wife, lovely and amazing wife, Lauren, maintains it. So if you send a message, she will relay it to me. And then CaliforniaColdBlood.com is where you can buy it. An advanced copy of Strongbones. It is available for advanced purchase there. It's also available in an electronic version on Amazon. But I just want to be mindful and acknowledge that can be pretty prickly for some people. So if you want to buy an ebook version, advanced direct through California Cold Blood, you can do that too. So that's where you can go to find me. And
Oh,
stalk me.
awesome, man. Well, and again, I really thank you because, and I think we're going to have you back to do something
Oh,
else more fanish, you know. But I
great.
just definitely, I've treated this as an interview with an author, and we've had best-selling authors on here, from Kevin Hearn to Mark and Draco to
Woo.
Daniel Kraus, who worked with Romero
Yeah.
posthumously, who wrote Shape of Water with Guillermo del Toro, you know, all these type of people. And I definitely want to acknowledge you as a writer in your own right.
Oh,
You're
thank
one
you.
of the people who, like I said, I've seen you go from person thinking about writing novels to person who has written three. And it's fantastic. It's what it's like watching somebody start a family and really, you know, drill down on that. So I'm very proud to know you, brother, and I'm proud to have you
You too.
be a beta reader for my my Texas detour that I'm dropping on that ass.
I cannot wait. Name the time and place, and Ed, right back at you. Thank you so much for having me on and for all the kind words. I said this before. I hold you in such high regard, and I'm really grateful to have been on today. I've kind of been a rough stretch, I will tell you, and this really made my day. Thank you.
Oh, rock and roll, man. So thank you guys very much for listening to this episode. Thank you guys for dropping ratings and reviews. Thank you guys for clicking like on the YouTube videos. Ron's a little bit behind on them, but he's going to catch back up. It's a lot of work punching in on people's faces because I don't want to do it. But thank you guys for being part of this community that we fostered through the Patreon and through your reviews. You don't want to give us any money on Patreon. A review doesn't cost anything. So drop those on there, and please stay safe out there. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Greatest Pod.